The fresh brand on your neck, marking you as condemned, itches terribly as you approach the city gates. Your caravan is filled with those like you, accused and accursed, branded with the Pilgrim's badge. In recompense for your crimes, your company must wander the wilds in search of enigmatic quintessence sought by your city to protect its inhabitants from the curse of falsum mortem. A grim quest lies ahead of you, yet compared to the alternative, banishment to the wilds, never-ending unlife, and eternal damnation as a demoniac, this almost feels like a blessing.
Welcome to Why We Roll,
a tabletop role-playing game design podcast by the Stillfleet Studio.
We're your hosts, Chris Pickett, creator of the historical fantasy game Danse Macabre,
and Wythe Marshall, creator of the political sci-fi game Stillfleet.
Through the show, we hope to amplify new creative voices.
We chat with different indie TTRPG designers, talking through a range of questions that are pertinent to many designers, players, and GMs.
We hope to showcase fresh and even challenging ideas about what makes imagination-based games so powerful.
Before we introduce today's guest, a reminder. If you enjoy this episode, please consider supporting the show and all of our games over at patreon.com/Stillfleet.
Okay, let's find out why we roll.
Live on Why We Roll. What's up, Chris?
Not much. Hanging in there. How about you, Wythe?
Same, yeah. Just hanging in there, working, getting ready for PAX.
Yeah, a lot of prep for PAX right now.
Yep. I hear you're going to be running some games.
I will be. Yeah, I'll be running games with Games on Demand.
Cool, me too.
Oh, yeah. Who'd have thought? That's
so weird.
That's so weird. Yeah, I'm going to be running 3 different playtests of Danse Macabre at PAX Unplugged this year. One Friday, one Saturday, and one on Sunday. I don't recall the times right now, but maybe we can find a way to share that with folks.
Yeah, if you listen to this episode before PAX, this will make sense. If you listen to it after, it won't matter as much, but you can always go to stillfleet.com/conventions and find basically a little table that Aaron H., our Banshee, our tech designer, has created that just shows you very simply when and where different games are happening at whatever con is coming up next. So as we do more cons, we just update that page faster, and it's pretty simple.
I actually didn't know that we had this convention schedule on our site, and it's great, I gotta say.
It's pretty great, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Big shout out to Aaron.
Convenient. Super convenient.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, and we've now solidified we're going to do Page Philadelphia. That's the name of the city. Area game exhibition, which is after PAX. It's in the dead of winter, and it's a little outside of Philly, but it's very indie and it's kind of new, so that's fun. It's like smaller companies and very enthusiastic gamers. We went last year for the very first year, and it was fun. And then we're going to also be at Running Gag, which is the Geneseo area gaming group, which is also a pun. And that is in February in Geneseo, which is sort of near Rochester. So again, we'll have details on all that, but we're trying to do a good amount of events to kind of just meet people and show them our games, especially as Danse Macabre is coming out, sometimes Kingdom's coming out, and we finally will have in person, in physical form, Blister Critters and Robot Hospital. So Very exciting to have a few more games to actually, be able to hold up and show people.
Yeah.
Including what we're talking about today, Danse Macabre.
That's right.
Prima Mors. Right?
Prima Mors.
It's a prima.
The Mors is so prima. The death is so first.
It's the best of death. No, it's not actually about fake Italians in Brooklyn in the 1800s. It's about real different Mediterranean peasants in 1400 roughly.
Yeah,
so
roughly 1400.
Little different.
But yeah, Danse Macabre, Prima Mors. We've talked about Danse Macabre on the show before. We had a little intro session But that was a while back, and a lot has changed with the game since we first introed it and first did a little bit of playtesting a little bit over a year ago as of recording. And yeah, I'm excited about the changes. I think that it's been really fun to kind of take apart the game and then put it back together, finding out new things about it, finding out tweaks that need to be made. It's been really exciting. We are also actively playtesting Danse Macabre. So again, this is a shout out if you want to get in on some playtesting and if you are interested in like having a very active hand in shaping the game, now's the time to do it. But yeah, we're going to be running playtests on the Stillfleet Discord server. And if you're in Brooklyn, we're going to be having live playtests as well, which are TBD on dates. But yeah, we're going to have that going on.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time as we, I think, come out of a period of what I would call woodshedding, which is a term in art, we borrow from jazz, from our various comrades, maybe literally in a woodshed with musical instruments, I think is where the metaphor comes from, but metaphorically just kind of working on your craft. And I think for us, it's not just game design, although we're always working on game design, but it was really the craft of running or developing rather a company that is not just Wythe publishes one sci-fi game, but like a bunch of people who are all friends helping each other publish a bunch of games that are somewhat similar, but all ultimately distinct. And what it, kind of how does that umbrella organization work, and what are some things that we need to do to basically be successful and not have things take years and years and years. I mean, if a game takes 10 years to develop, it might be the best game ever, but it's probably not like a great business plan for one. So it's an interesting theme about that in the context of, Blister Critters and then Danse Macabre and the Sometimes Kingdom. So different games that are linked in system, but different authors, different artists. And so today we can talk about that first physical product we published for Danse Macabre as sort of a test, and also really something I think, at least I found it helpful, Chris. I'd love to hear you reflect on that. But a way to get a lot of work done really quickly is by just setting an arbitrary deadline, which was like print a zine to bring to Gen Con, so August 1st. So this summer we gave ourselves, this goal of printing something, some sort of quick start. Hence first death, right? Prima Mors.
Yeah, Prima Mors. Yeah, I was going to say the first death is the deepest.
It's probably the most surprising, I guess, if you
it's the most
if you just can't die, right? But yeah, we're hoping to run some more games of the system now that I think, Chris, you've been working on a little more and have more of the full rules fleshed out. So instead of just Prima Mors, which was really the first, instantiation, the first version, now we have this bigger version that you're working on that actually is evolving. So that's also something I think we're going to talk about today, is kind of where we netted out with a sort of quick start, which you can find on Itch and TTRPG, and very soon directly on our own site. But also, what is going on with the rulebook? That's, hey, I want to know too, what's going on with the rulebook. But I know some of it. I've seen some sneak peeks, and it's rad. So yeah, I'm really excited to have a real historical game. And I think we have a lot of ideas. We had some good conversations actually with some, random friends of the game who had good suggestions. So where should we start off? Do you think we should introduce what is Prima Mors, or recap that for, if you're just joining us?
Yeah, maybe we can start off by just recapping Danse Macabre in general. Yeah, so yeah, Danse Macabre, it's historical fantasy, or the term that I like to use is medieval horror, which is kind of a newish literary genre that's starting to come out. There's a lot of good examples, like Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman, or Pilgrim by Mitchell Luthi are both great examples of medieval horror that use medieval folklore, cultural ideas, and specifically the religions that were, Catholicism in Between Two Fires, and with Pilgrim, it leans a lot on Islamic belief. But yeah, taking those ideas and being like, well, what if this was real, or like blending real history and actual lived religious experience with kind of cosmic horror elements, where it's like, oh, well, maybe we can't quite understand the world the way that we thought we did. So yeah, Danse Macabre, it sits right in the pocket of medieval horror. The idea is that it is 1390, and about 60 years before the start of the game, before the start of the show, there is an event called the abandonment, where suddenly death just stops working the way it's supposed to. And instead, when a human dies, they are resurrected within a few hours of their death. But when you are resurrected, you come back with these various mutations, which are called maleficia. They can be really rad. They can like give you tentacle arms. They can give you like the ability to control fire, magnetokinesis, things like that. They can also just make you really fucking ugly and make you hard to understand in your speech. And there's pluses and drawbacks to all of the maleficia. But, you know, the idea is kind of taking high lethality OSR gameplay, but putting it into a real politics situation and giving players an opportunity to see their character change over time in ways that you may not expect. So yeah, a lot of OSR inspiration in there, a lot of randomness and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, and so it's meant to be, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I have been marketing it a bit, so I feel I'm correct that it is. It's meant to be OSR-ish in the sense that it's D&D adjacent, you know, sort of low fantasy, picaresque. You wander around with swords, and there are monsters. In this case, mostly sort of mutated fellow humans,
Right.
perhaps beasts, and we can talk about that as well, and sort of how you are thinking about narrative tension in the game. But one key difference is that historical and really sort of philosophical and spiritual insistence that this isn't really just a game about combat, although you can try to run it that way. But because of the weirdness of the setting, I would say very similar to, because I'm a big fan of sort of zombie apocalypse narratives, that type of totalized, you know, real apocalypse in the sense of a revelation of a new world. Like the old order is dead. Hey, maybe I was the crazy one all along, right? Sort of I am legend vibes because, you know, people who die are brought back to life and they become sort of more and more mutated. So in a weird way, to preserve your humanity seems like a natural goal to give the player, but also sets them in a sort of an interesting, you know, counterpoise. They're sort of a minor part of this now mutated strange ecology. And it really calls to mind for me another subgenre I really, really love, which is that of, I just think of it increasingly as just zone SF. So really beginning with Roadside Picnic and Stalker by Tarkovsky, but you see it with Annihilation, even now the sort of
Yeah.
lab genre, retro, you know, nostalgic SF of sort of Stranger Things, the OA, Maniac. We just watched a good Thai one called Don't Come Home that's really good in that genre. But I think, you know, the idea of zones of exclusion that are polluted in some sort of almost like spiritual or philosophical way that almost ties these works again because of really Tarkovsky's actual maybe Christian leanings. It kind of makes that version of SF feel more like I think a medieval sort of encounter with wonder and awe.
Yeah.
And I think your game has that sense of desolation of like you're out in the woods and man, everybody you meet's a mutant. It's kind of lonely, but it's also sort of this austere beauty and just the beauty of weirdness, you know. So I think the game, your art, I think, does a lot of that work, and the fact it's black and white, the fact it's very stripped down compared to the tome like writing that myself, Stephen Aubrey, you know, Aaron, we sort of publish these long, high SF books, and I think you've taken this approach of and very very smartly of sort of minimalism in the design too. So it feels OSR-y, but I think some of the minimalism of the OSR is just like I don't know what I'm doing, you know, whereas I think here it's very intentional. It's like restrained. So I think that'll be
Yeah.
an interesting kind of, you know, direction.
Yeah. Restraint is interesting to think about when it comes to the game, because it is very easy. This is something that we've found in playtesting, is that it's very easy for it to slide into the kind of very fighty kind of OSR experience that a lot of people expect, where it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to go slay monsters and things like that. But then there's also this interesting tension where people want to also hold like some reverence for the religious cultures at the time and want their character to survive, but you know, it's difficult in the game. It's been interesting to see the parts where you do have to exercise restraint in order to kind of corral the conversation of the game.
And I think that'll be so. Maybe this leads into what is in Prima Mors and versus what or versus the rulebook, right? Which you're working on now, and you've added substantially to since Prima Mors, in addition to obviously more gorgeous art. So again, if you're listening to the podcast, you should go to itch.io and check out, Stillfleet. It's probably the fastest way. Just you can Google it
Yeah.
and look up, Danse Macabre Prima Mors and see some of the art, but there'll be a lot more, especially on our Patreon very soon. So we've queued up, a bunch more. We'll get to this, but Maleficia, the mutations in the game, and some more art from Chris. So in addition to that, sort of more of the same, right? More tables or longer
Hmm.
tables, more backgrounds, basically sort of classes, more equipment, probably that sort of thing. Um, how have you thought about it? Because I definitely hear you that the playtest we've done with Prima Mors, it's so stripped down. You have so few powers, and it feels so deadly that it is very sort of combat focused in that way. You're like, damn, mutants are going to jump out. I gotta not get got by the mutants.
Yeah, I'm gonna get
Um,
got.
and it still brings up all these philosophical things, and we've joked around about in a way it makes you sort of role play some sort of religious conviction of some type
Yeah.
because you're trying to sort of voice it in that if you're acting at all, if you're RPing, you're voicing it in this old school way. But I think probably there's some other things you had in mind in terms of some of the dynamics of different social groups and or humans in the world. And maybe I remember back with your initial version of the game and some of the stuff we talked about in this podcast was like the end goal of actually getting to an ending and how that could be different every time. And I really loved
Hmm.
that idea that the GM and player could kind of decide, okay, well, maybe in this version of Danse Macabre, you can like end the abandonment of death or like
Yeah.
embrace it or whatever. Like maybe there is, and it's not something that the game tells you, how to do.
No, yeah, it certainly leaves open the possibility of having that be a narrative thread that you can pull at. Yeah, because the original in the first iteration of the game before it itself mutated, kind of the goal of the game was to die. It was this like cycle of life and death, and this was still when it was one player and one GM. So it was more of like kind of a one shot, just like go through this story kind of thing. But then, the more and more we play tested it, the more and more players wanted it to be party based. And I also wanted it to be bigger and take on a bigger life than just kind of a one shot game. I mean, speaking of like, trying to kind of parse out classes at the time, and classes is an interesting word, because traditional RPG class, you can do fighter, thief, wizard, whatever. But in Danse Macabre, like you are looking at like whether or not you were in the peasant class, or if you're in the mercantile class, or if you're in the kind of like scholar slash uh, um, theological class. So yeah, I don't know. That's something that I've added recently that I'm excited about, is kind of tweaking backgrounds, which is what we call it in Danse Macabre, instead of classes, because you don't do the same thing that you did before you started adventuring. So yeah, that's your background. But one of the biggest changes that you'll even see between Prima Mors and now, the newer editions, is that the backgrounds have changed pretty substantially. And it's now basically just like one of three backgrounds, and then you choose abilities or skills from those backgrounds when you're creating your character. So there's the peasant background class, there is the mercantile or the merchant, and then there's also the scholar. And each one of them focuses on a different attribute. Peasants tend to focus more on kind of bodily attributes like finesse and vitality. Scholars tend to focus more on fervor and insight, things like that. But yeah, trying to find a way to like have a lot of agency for players where they can kind of customize their character, but also frame it within a simple kind of class matrix. It's one of the big things in Prima Mors, or in Danse Macabre in general, is that all of the player characters are on the lower end of the social spectrum. You're not playing the nobility, you're not playing people that are in charge, you're playing people who essentially can and are being taken advantage of by the mechanisms of this kind of like weird pseudo state that you find yourself in. So yeah, just really wanted to drive home that like there is difference, there is variation, but where you come from is important. But none of it is nobility. Like nobody has like amazing amounts of wealth or influence, which is why you find yourself as a pilgrim being sent out into the wilderness on your own anyway.
Yeah, and I think that hopefully, I think that'll come out also in the setting chapters and the quests that you're writing and kind of directing GMs in a more general sense in terms of narrative structure. That the game can be run with just straight up like dungeon style crawls, fighting monsters, wilderness encounters, but the intention is to have a little more sort of back and forth with different factions of people in this kind of post-apocalyptic world. And I think there's different ways that different games are able to get at that. And so much of it, I think, is reliant on sort of IP you already know about. When I think about like how Fallout or games like that sort of treat modern post-apocalypse, or in that case, retro future, but essentially modern. And then you have, zombie apocalypse, again, sort of modern and is building on a legacy from Romero to Walking Dead to now. And I think what's interesting is you're trying to get people who are basically coming from that D&D or OSR world to maybe consider other narrative structures alongside, of course, wilderness crawls, dungeon crawls, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But to think about themselves as in this kind of mutated apocalyptic landscape and as being a pilgrim, right? Being in this kind of religious role where the community sort of relies on them to go get quintessence, to go out and find this MacGuffin life force. I think that'll be sort of one of the generative things I'm looking forward to, just thinking ahead to like future you finishing the book, is a little more and sort of how GMs can begin to differentiate and do the game, right? Because I think every game, as you write it, ideally, if it's not just a complete clone of like D&D or whatever, you come up with some other ideas about like how to play it.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's just where my brain goes. But yeah, so in addition to, so there's differences currently in how you fashioned the core kind of like character building from Prima Mors. Something that is the same is you start with one Maleficium, right? So one mutation, and those are real
correct.
weird.
Yeah.
And you've written now 50 as opposed to the 20 in the book, in the first version.
Yeah,
and they now have 3 levels, right? So can you say a little more about, so you're going to have some more options in terms of background, which is a little bit like class in other RPGs. And then you're also going to have Maleficia, but you're starting Maleficium, you'll have more options, and then there's these levels. So sorry, tell us about all that.
Yeah, no, I would love to. The in the original version of Danse Macabre, I had a D666 table, which is 216 discrete entries. And I wrote all of them, and not all of them are that good, really, looking back. They're pretty rough. But that's okay. It was a sketch of a game. It's fine. But yeah, so the goal with the full rulebook for Danse Macabre now is to have 100 entries, so a D100 table of Maleficia. Currently, we've got a list of 50. I have 100 sketched out, working on filling out the rest of those. And so we can release that on Patreon. Hint, hint, wink, wink. If you want to see it, join our Patreon. But yeah, so we've got 50 right now. And something that I decided to do was, like you said, add levels or tiers to each one of the Maleficia. I think I wrote recently in a post that, yes, a D100 list is very big. It gives you a lot of variance, which is great and exciting. But in a lot of games that have mutations in them, there's no way of handling if you roll the same mutation. Like, what happens? Like, do you just get a second version of that? I don't know. So I really liked the idea of having an option where if you do roll the same mutation, at least up to 3 times, you maintain the same Maleficia, but it grows and it changes. Oftentimes the benefits get better, but the drawbacks get worse at the same time. So yeah, I think it's an interesting way to continue seeing your character kind of change and literally mutate and morph throughout the game, while also giving you access to some pretty crazy powers at the same time. Which I also think is an interesting tension in Danse Macabre, where it's like, yes, you want to avoid death to a certain point, but also, like, if you want to be able to throw fireballs at people, you got to die a few times, and maybe you get to throw fireballs at people. But yeah, I like the flexibility of the tiers. I like that it allows the powers to get even weirder over time. And it allows for this interesting gradation. Like, I think one of them that I really like, the Maleficia is called Tentaculum. And it starts out, the first tier of it is that your fingers get replaced by tentacles. So it's like, nothing really changes. You now have weird hands. You can still use them like hands. It's not that weird. But then in the second tier of it, it's that now your entire arms are both tentacles. You don't have hands anymore. Maybe you have like the little tentacles on the end, but it's kind of not really usable as a hand. But you can use it as a whip or a club or to grapple, things like that. So there's trying to find balance between the benefits and the drawbacks of each one, which has been a lot of fun to play around with, especially as each power scales.
Yeah, and I think even with 50, there's too many to just rely on randomness if you wanted to do the 1, 2, 3 power thing. So I think that's something also to play with in terms of the more advanced rules and just in playtesting, is if to the degree you want that to be part of the experience, it just occurs to me, if that's truly meant to be random, then it almost needs to be like you're constantly getting mutations. Whereas currently it's constrained, right? You get a certain number and beyond that you become a demoniac. You lose your mind completely and become just a beast of the wild. At least according to, human understanding. And we have some good things in the chat. So you become Octodad and you have to complete household chores without anyone knowing you're secretly an octopus. So that could definitely be.
That can be an entire story in Danse Macabre.
It's like an urban crawl, but it's actually just chores. You're just doing chores.
Yeah.
And you're Abby.
Well, I mean, that's a part of the play loop, right? Is that you go out into the wilderness, you have to complete these quests, and you're kind of bound to do these things. But then when you come back to Constantinople, which is the setting for Danse Macabre, when you come back to Constantinople, you have time to do other things, which is where a lot of the faction rules are going to come in. That's something we're trying to kind of tease out how that works within the grit system at the moment. But yeah, that's when faction rules will come in. So if you want to maybe change factions, maybe abandon the Canticum and work for somebody else, that's a possibility. Or just getting resources from other factions as well. But yeah, it's also like, if you wanted to craft something, you can do that in your downtime. If you want to run chores, you can do that in your downtime. And that can be an entire session where it's just like, what do you do on your day off in Constantinople with all these mutants around? But yeah, there's no stopping that from being like an actual narrative cycle that you can jump into, which I think is really fun.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to that. And I think that's where the faction rules can be different game to game. I think it'd be great to have this core, the spine, similar to the grid system for individuals, where we have group level scores that work in any game setting. And we've been working on that. And Chris, you've been part of that discussion in the background. But it would be fun to see how maybe in Danse Macabre you come up with some downtime play loops that are simple enough, a couple spreads or something. But I think that would be fun and add a lot to the idea of your lived character in this time that is very different, and that many people, what's so funny about this is people have no problem being like, I'm a bard of Faerun, which is not a place, and bard is not really a thing and whatever. But they do somehow have more of a problem being like, I'm a peasant from, Greece or Egypt or Turkey, 1,000 years ago, which like you can just Wikipedia that basically. The Lord's but I mean, I get it. It's almost like the fantasy in made up games lets you make stuff up. So that's kind of what you're militating against. But I think so many things in the game can help with that. And I think the full rulebook will be even. I mean, I think Prima Mors is great, but I think the full rulebook will be really fun to see how you sort of still keeping it sort of minimal, pack in these other versions of life beyond because Prima Mors I think is mostly sort of like you could use it to do sort of wilderness crawls effectively, right? And I think it doesn't quite yet point at like some of that rich faction, downtime. What is my life like? I guess it points at it in the narrative at the beginning. The first chapter is some great writing that gets at the ideas, but I'm just curious to see sort of it get fleshed out.
Yeah.
So
there are definitely hints of like life outside of just quests in Prima Mors. But Prima Mors was kind of, like you said at the top, we're going to print something by a certain date and boom, and I think that the picaresque kind of wilderness crawl stuff in some ways is the easier part of writing this game. Just because there's so much precedent, it's really easy to like look at the history of TTRPGs and just be like, oh, picaresque adventures, got it. But there's not a lot of like, I don't know, just daily life of medieval people. What's it like to be a peasant? Which also is not to say that, we want it to be a simulationist kind of, like you have to count your silver pieces and buy bread and it's not that, but just trying to like flesh out, what was life like at this time? And then asking the question, what would it be like if this apocalypse happened? If there was a revelation, like you said.
Enjoying the show? Please consider supporting Why We Roll in all of our games over at patreon.com/Stillfleet. Dear patrons, we really love y'all. We just couldn't keep making Why We Roll without your support. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Now back to the show. Yeah, and I think that's the challenge with, the level of fantasy or the level of speculation in any SF genre game, or even like the level of simulation in a modern game. I mean, it's, like you said, you never want to have one-to-one boring realism, but you also can't go you just end up with things that are maybe harder to repeat play. And I think something that we all tend to align on internally is just trying to make games that are meant to be sort of scaffolds for like ongoing play. If you wanted, you could always do them as one shots because you can always just do something as a one shot. But I think that is always a tension. So I think Danse Macabre is on solid footing with the level of minimalism it's achieved, while still having, completely playable game, simulating, among other things, kind of mutant combat. And then now adding on, factions and thinking about sort of like we had a good conversation with that's this young scholar, Marshall, about like the religiosity and how to bring in sort of relics from different cultures and just represent them in a way that's kind of fun. It actually brings me back to the conversation we had with Zoe and Mac on the Maniculum and their work with sort of real legends and real magic in games, as opposed to, very high powered fantasy magic with lots of rules. It's sort of like one-off weirdness, which feels again sort of more zone like. But so maybe there's a couple things I was thinking we could try to get to, and also totally down for whatever you have in mind. But I was just thinking, do you want to tell people generally your plans as a writer for kind of going from you wrote a quick start to you have some other stuff to ... underpants gnomes, there's a full book? Like, is that fair to ask, or is that like, I don't want to cause anxiety. It's, but is there some ways in which you can speak to your process and how you view the next few months and like, what does it mean to be done with something? Those kinds of questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I kind of feel like with TTRPGs, you're never really done. There's always more that you can do, but I think it's about like finding the spot where you're comfortable of saying like, okay, this is ready to go out. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, my process is a little bit chaotic, but trying to rein it in. But yeah, I mean, it's essentially trying to write just a chapter a month. Just trying to be consistent about getting about a chapter a month out, and that's been hit or miss. I think just because of my own, foibles with neurodivergence, but. Yeah, I mean that's the idea, is that just trying to consistently work on it. And the way that works for me is just to like break it out into different sections. So I like to kind of plan things out with an outline and then outline each section that I'm going to write, and then just use that as kind of scaffolding to go from there. But it has been interesting going from Danse Macabre to the full book because, there's already substantive changes between then and now, the printing of Danse Macabre and now. And some of that, honestly, I find to be the more difficult work, is going back and changing the things that are already established. Partially because, like, it's my baby and I don't want to change it, but also partially because, I think it's easier to just, like, sit down with a fresh page, at least for me, the way that my mind works. It's easier to sit down with a fresh page and just be like, here's everything. As opposed to going back and revising. I find that, for some reason, slightly more difficult. So it's mostly just been newer material lately. But yeah, I mean, the idea is that, over the next several months, just keep playtesting and integrate feedback as much as possible. Most of the revisions that I'm doing now are from direct feedback from players, which has been great. So we're playtesting every 2 weeks starting soon. And yeah, just trying to piece it together as we go. A lot of the setting still needs to be filled out. That's something that I'm working on at the moment, mostly just doing research on. Which is a big part of my process, is spending a lot of time researching. Um, and I knew less about medieval Constantinople than I thought I did, which is nice to know. Like, it's nice to be surprised.
Yeah, no, well, the research part, I mean, is this, is so interesting, and into the idea of things just being ongoing. I think that that is part of designing also in genre fiction in general, is like whatever genre you're in, you'll end up learning more and
Yeah.
kind of wanting to go back or tweak things. Your relationship to it changes. And even like for two examples, I'm working on, and I'm waiting actually, because I think you're editing my hopefully a book that actually a different publisher will print. So it won't be one of our products per se, but another game using the grid system that's set in 1700. So it's meant to be sort of a companion, just a one-off shorter game, but called Picaro. So this would be sort of early modern, and that's similarly. I was reading all this stuff where I was like, oh, I know about the 30 Years War, and no, it's just so much crazy. There's so many more
Yeah.
wars, and they're the reasons for them are so trite and dumb, and it's just like history is really interesting. It's also really dumb,
Yeah.
and you can sort of never plumb its full just stupidity. I mean, and there's great characters, there's great people who are doing great, interesting things, but this sort of macro political, military history, religious history is just like a cavalcade of jerks, and it really has that Coen Brothers esque like, wait, why did this next thing? It's a fascinating kind of process to see sort of one thing lead to the next to get to the modern shapes of nation state borders and whatnot. And then same with SF. I was thinking about with Stillfleet the other day because I've been listening to a bunch of these podcasts about the hearings on UFOs. And I don't know if you've been following. There's like a lot of UFO stuff going on with the U.S. government. That's just wild. It's just one of those things where you're like, well, I mean, I guess it's low key, slowly validating. It's like getting the American public to be ready for the idea that like probably not biological or necessarily terrifying, but just like some sort of probes have been captured at various points, and
Yeah.
it just feels like there's enough sort of leaked, or it's some weird psyop that also like, why would that be? Like, I can't really make it fit on the traditional left right, like anything else that's going on. It feels like this kind of, Leroy Jenkins from another version, another timeline of our political system. All to say, blah blah blah. No, I think that's all interesting. The things you said. I mean, I'm wondering just really concretely, if someone's following along, they maybe they have Prima Mors or they look it up and they get engaged. So a couple of things you mentioned. One is that you're interested in feedback. It sounds like
Mm.
so. Getting on the Discord. You can go to discord.stillfleet.com. And also, you're even meeting in person in Brooklyn, so getting involved with that if you're in New York. Beyond that, I am interested. Like, do you have a sense of how long you want the like? Do you feel like the outline you'd set is working, and you're kind of writing to it, and it's going in a good direction? Again, not to put you on the spot, just kind of curious how you're envisioning,
Yeah.
this like end state.
It's funny because it's working out in the same way that Prima Mors did in some ways, which little inside baseball for those watching or listening. Prima Mors originally I think was going to be like a 25-page zine, something just very like, short, sweet, to the point. And then in the process of writing it and editing it, Wythe and I both realized that it needed to be longer. And yeah, so then we ended up printing a 65-page booklet instead of just a 25-page zine. And it's funny because the outline didn't change really between the 25-page zine idea and the actual product itself, the actual book itself. Like, the outline stayed more or less the same, but it's just the amount of content that I want to put into it. It makes it feel like it's bigger than the outline is, if that makes sense, even though it's not. So yeah, it's interesting. It's hard for me to gauge time when I'm writing, or to gauge like how much space I'm going to fill when I'm writing, when I'm coming up with an outline. So yeah, it's kind of operating in the same way where it's like, I think originally diving into it, I was aiming for maybe like 150 pages or so, but I'm getting the feeling that it's probably going to be closer to 200 at this point. So yeah, it'll be a chunky A5, but
No, I think 200 pages A5 is not at all like, oh my God, what is this tome? Annoyance level. I think it's more like full, like, okay, this is a full product all in one book.
yeah.
And we can also revisit that as you go. I mean, I will say I definitely remember with like Stillfleet, there were like a lot more chapters with like lore and GMing related tables and advice and thoughts. Almost all of which got stripped out. You know, it became half of one chapter at the end, both for space, but also sort of like felt rightness. You know, like a lot of the
Yeah.
lore work we'd introduced earlier, we're able to sort of do in other ways, and some of the GMing stuff felt like this is more like blog post. You know, this doesn't need to be in the book,
Mm,
right? It's just sort of rambling thoughts. So, not saying that'll happen one to one in the same way, but maybe certain sections will be longer because they need to be. In other sections,
yeah.
you can find actually, oh, you'd budgeted 10, 20 pages, but you can kind of do it in 5. Maybe it gets kind of nested into another chapter. So
Yeah, yeah. I think it's also interesting to see it bounce back and forth from editing as well. Because I mean, really, yeah, Danse Macabre Prima Mors was the first time I had worked with an editor on something that I had written. And there weren't like a ton of substantive changes, but it was interesting to see the amount of text kind of shift over time. Also, just seeing like I think I use a lot of superfluous words whenever I'm writing, so it's nice to kind of like have somebody be like, oh, we can actually cut that back. It's not as long as you think it needs to be, which is always helpful.
yeah, well, that's also editing in general. But yeah, I think I'm very genuinely curious to see as we move from playtesting stream. Well, as we playtest Prima Mors more, and you move into playtesting the sort of next version in a way,
Hmm.
to hear how the core rules change, if at all, and um, how those things might then condition some of the rest of the book, if to the degree that you relate. So, like downtime rules, for example, if those relate back to some of the core things you're doing. If they're totally separate, then again, it really is just like how long is it? Is it 2 pages? Is it 20 pages? Right. I think just real high level question is the goal to have Danse Macabre come out in a given timeline? Do you want to say anything public about that, or is that all sort of
No, yeah.
TBD
I
secret
mean, I think
sauce?
what did we say a year from now? About a year, like August
Yeah,
or September of 2025. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm fine. I'm fine saying that. It's actually good
you
to
heard it
say.
here first.
Give me a deadline because otherwise my AD will HD. Yeah, no. Basically, fall of 2025 is kind of the general timeline that we're looking at. The studio's got some other stuff that we're doing between now and then. We got some projects that are in the works. But yeah, looking at about a year out from now to finish everything up, get it edited, finish up the art, which is
Yeah,
the big one. I think that's been an interesting journey or a lesson from Prima Mors as well. Is like, oh right, the art needs to be full bleed. It has to have these certain like print standards, as well as just like realizing the amount of images that it takes to make a TTRPG book. It's more than I would have thought. Really, not having like actually designed a layout before.
that's an interesting point that maybe is worth dwelling on if anyone, to the degree people listen to this podcast for like advice or think or looking ahead at doing their own books, is depending on what you want the saturation of imagery. Like, are you in your mind making a book that looks like another book you've read, maybe
Mm,
by a bigger publisher that has a certain amount? Then you have to, as a random person perhaps, or small company, like do that math. Like, okay,
yeah,
they're using one image every spread, so one image every 2 pages, or one image every 4 pages, so every 2 spreads. So when you're shuffling through, you won't get a lot of images, and then the next time you flip the page, you will get something. And then there's it can go on and on from there.
yeah,
And if you just do the basic math, so if you have a 200-page book, it's 100 spreads. If you wanted something on every spread, you have to do 100 pieces of art, even if some of it's small. If you cut that in half, you're getting that again every other. Some of the imagery is persistent, so like Chris did for Prima Mors, if you check that out, really beautiful ornamentation that is all. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's all actually from medieval sources that
yep,
you've redrawn in
yeah,
your style, but it's directly picking up these elements from how medieval manuscripts were illuminated. So it feels right. It also just looks cool, and that stuff can
yeah,
recur over and over again, and your eye doesn't get tired of it. But your art is, to me, one of the standout reasons to play the game is this kind of anime style. It's sort of berserk inspired, right? It feels very much in line with that medieval horror.
No, I'm a proud Berserk fan, and I hope people see that influence in the game and in the art specifically. Yeah, Kentaro Miura, huge influence. How could he not be?
Yeah, so I know that that is a big, not necessarily hurdle, but just something to ration out over
Yeah.
time, to figure that out as we move forward with trying to get the game play tested and finalized in terms of rules and all that. Is at the same time you have to be doing the art. Of course, we have to
Hmm.
put it all together. But yeah, we're looking at hopefully a year from now releasing some sort of printed, A5, maybe 150, 200 page book, with this full experience of playing medieval fantasy horror, of a very particular type, through Chris's lens. But that's very broadly, I think, appealing, and it'll be, I think, a nice entry into the vast catalog of OSR games, but a catalog that I think, as you and I have talked about, often every book in it feels pretty similar, actually, rules wise. So this will be,
Yeah, they're
yeah,
pretty much all the same game. I don't want to shit on anybody, but
no, yeah.
I'm not going to
If
name
that's
names.
your
But
thing, that's your thing.
if that's your
But
thing, that's your thing. If you like BXD&D, there's a billion versions of it that you can play.
yeah,
But yeah,
but
no,
this will
like
be a little different. This will be
this will be a
fun
little,
if you
this will
like
be a little
those, but
different.
a little
Yeah,
different. Yeah,
yeah. Just try it. You might like it.
just a little. Vex
Uh,
points out public domain and like manipulating photos, smart use of photo,
yes.
work, can really fill gaps in art, and that's definitely something, that's true. And I think some of that is also tone setting. So there's books, uh, like, Psycho Dungeon, right, is largely driven by photography,
Hmm.
and there's books that are more driven by unique, illustration style. And some of this is a question of what are you trying to call to mind. So, like Danse Macabre, because photography isn't invented until the mid 1800s, using photographs of the imagined medieval, I think, actually pulls you out of it in a weird way. Whereas an anime style drawing, because it's still a drawing, for me at least, it fits that sort of aesthetic better, the heavy metal early
Yeah.
D&D sort of stuff.
Yeah.
We used a lot of photos for Kadita for the spy,
Mm.
version of Stillfleet we put out, because that felt, among other things, it was such a good way to represent urban decay and sort of urban espionage, was to just literally show pieces of New York City and just mess up the image, mess up the photography enough where, yeah, this could be like a satellite, a moon city.
Yeah.
But I think some of that was the choice to sort of tonally, be in this kind of, ultra realist surveillance state, as opposed to, when you're in a dreamy medieval.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Chris? Sorry.
I was going to say, my drawing style as well, I always kind of describe as etching adjacent. I use a lot of line work for shading and a lot of cross hatching and things like that. So it's also trying to call to mind medieval woodcut techniques and things like that. So subtly having aesthetic echoes between actual like medieval manuscripts and woodcuts and things like that, and then a more modernized, yeah, kind of like anime inspired style, mixing those together. And yeah, Vex in the chat says choosing your tone direction before starting on art is a good idea. Could not agree more. I think that's super important. New York is basically space. You're not wrong.
Yeah, it's the future. It's just the bad future. So we
Yeah,
just dwell
yeah.
in this, synecdoche, version of it.
The
Um,
bad future is now. But yeah, I will
Welcome.
say, I think, yeah, choosing your tone before you start, especially if you're illustrating your own book the way that I am, and not everybody is a psychopath and does this to themselves, but yeah, I think, choosing your own tone, and then also, Wythe, something that was super helpful when we started working on Prima Mors was being like, okay, well, if we are going to do this spread by spread, if we're going to have something every spread, then we know the amount of images that we need. And being able to say, okay, well, I know the outline for this chapter. These are the images that I want to have in it, or at least some idea of the direction of the images that you want to accompany the text. Massively helpful. I think, honestly, the way that I've operated in the past has just kind of been like, I'm going to draw a bunch of stuff and fit it in where it fits. But it makes it feel less contiguous. I don't know. It feels more rocky. It feels less like a kind of smooth reading experience when you do that. So yeah, I really like just pre-planning everything as much as you can. My approach right now is just writing. I'm just writing as much as possible. And then once I have the writing done, going through, looking at how we're going to lay everything out and kind of tailoring the art specifically to each spread and chapter. But, also, like Vex said, photo manipulation is great. Public domain is great. If you're not an illustrator, don't feel bad and don't feel like you don't have to, like you don't deserve to make a book or something. Like, there's ways around it. I think I'm just a glutton for punishment.
Yeah, and some games go the hyper minimalist route, which we haven't done yet, but it doesn't mean we couldn't. I'm really thinking of like Bastards specifically, but other games
Mm.
do this where there's just, or Songbirds even is all graphic design. It's more intense than Bastards, but both those books are driven by um, consistently applied graphic design choices as
Hmm.
opposed to illustration of anything. So there's nothing to be illustrated. It's you're in your mind, in the case of an OSR game in general, like Bastards, you're filling in kind of D&D experiences of your own with a nice graphic design scheme that's very clean and allowing you to do that and sort of showing you table after table. So again, there's lots of options there. I will say so. I know we want to keep this relatively brief this episode because this is more sort of teasing, right, some future things that we're working on and just promoting the idea that hey, this game is not just in development, but a, the quick starts out, and b, Chris is looking for playtesters to
Yeah.
move forward with finishing the rulebook. But also, C, I think we are going to have on some guests. We're trying to set up some sort of actual play esque. We're not going to do a full blown like season, but we might do one or maybe even two longer episodes where we, because it's us. Why not? We're gonna use the sort of privilege of hosting the show to do some episodes where we play Danse Macabre, and both that'll be a good play test for you, I think, Chris, to
Hmm.
bring us on a quest and work through some mechanical questions and narrative structural questions you might have. But I also think it'll be really fun. I think it'll be a little different style of AP than a lot of the Stillfleet and now Blister Critter stuff we've done, which of course genre wise is just is very distinct, and also
Yeah.
tonally, is very distinct from this kind of, in a way, weird way, sort of quieter, that the quietude of being lost in the wild, right?
Yeah.
So knowing us, we'll talk the entire fucking time, and you'll have to be like, "Shut the fuck up! It's supposed to be like magical." But
We're supposed to be touching the numinous right now, guys. No.
yeah. So that's coming, and if you want to get involved, if you're interested in playtesting with us, if you're interested in some AP, let us know. Maybe it would just also be good feedback if you just want to encourage Chris, and or if you want to hear your own voice or see your own face, in one of these here pod streams, hit us up. And I'm trying to think what else we wanted to cover. I was just thinking also, if you had time,
Hmm.
I could even just go over making a character, because we were thinking about
Oh
running
yeah, yeah.
a actual play soon. So I had pulled up ye olde character sheet, which you drew very beautifully again. So it's ornamented. It looks of the time.
Wow.
And I normally randomly assign everything. I did choose a couple things here, but I did, basically decide I was going to be a foot soldier who was, oh, right, I chose my crime. So I was expelled from the service of a local, Ottoman elite for drunkenness.
Nice.
So, but I'm very sanguine. I'm like a happy drunk who like is unfazed by the apocalypse. So sort of like I'm imagining some sort of post World War II like Italian movie about like a
Yeah.
mercenary who's kind of like, hey, so
Just have like
I looked.
broken gin blossoms and just like whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I looked up some facts and was kind of playing around with different who might this kind of mercenary have been, or like what would lead them to Constantinople. And then I always forget that actually in the game it's set actually a few decades after, right? So it's sort of like people
Mhm.
are now being born into this new world
Yeah.
where there's fewer
Yeah.
and fewer
It's
sort of human settlements that
I
are
think
not
yeah I think
taken over by
it's
mutants.
30 years before
30
the
years.
start of the game. Yeah. I think I may have
So I
said
would have just
60
been
earlier, but
born.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, that's an interesting, like, I don't know why in my brain it's always like, oh yeah, this just happened, but no, it's actually been like a generation. But yeah, in this game you have four stats: vitality, finesse, instinct, and fervor, or sorry, insight and
Insight.
fervor,
Yeah.
which are not exactly similar to the other grid system scores. And then you have health, which is your maximum vitality and maximum finesse, and grit, which is your maximum insight and maximum fervor. And you also have damage reduction, and you end up with one starting power. Although I'd encourage you to think about some more, potentially not to have too much power creep, but to give people some options of what to do. And then one maleficium, so one sort of really weird mutant thing, which can vary in sort of like how good is it, or quote unquote, and from a min max like combat focus perspective. And then you usually don't have a lot of stuff. You do get for free like a dagger, a torch, rope, that kind of thing. But um, you usually don't have a ton of money, but you might be able to buy like one nice other weapon. We did also talk about backgrounds, maybe giving you some gear in the future, so that if you're a foot soldier, you always have at least one useful weapon, because if you don't have a lot of money, it's kind of, otherwise I guess it's an interesting plot point. You have to like steal one, or you're just hitting
Yeah,
people with
yeah,
your fists,
hustle
which is
for it.
fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just a rules thing that like unlike in other games, you're not rolling one die for damage. This is sorry, unlike in Stillfleet, I should say, similar to Blister Critters, you're rolling
Yeah.
two dice. So you're rolling the damage for the weapon plus one of your scores. And actually in this game, what I think is one of the more interesting things is there are four kinds of weapons. So basically there's four scores. There's weapons that the different sort of strategies will lend themselves to in terms of what you roll to attack and what you roll for damage, which
Hmm.
I think makes sense, sort of brute force. So it's getting back a little to D&D, sort of strength versus dexterity, but I think it's interesting here because it's, again, very simple math. You're rolling, usually from a D6 to a D12, and then for damage, you're rolling two of those. So I think it ends up working out. It worked out really well in Blister Critters, so I'm excited to play test it more. We've played it a little,
Yeah.
but yeah, I made this foot soldier, so I've actually ended up with D12 finesse and D8 vitality, because polearms in the Prima Mors version use finesse.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure I would, be rolling finesse to attack, and rolling finesse for damage, so that I would get that big D12. So I
Yeah.
made totally just a min-maxed fighter type,
Hell yeah.
um, who I wrote down, once a Jalariad knight on loan to one of Constantinople's new Turkic elites, from his sheikh in Baghdad. Kara Hassan was drummed out of the army for drinking on the job. He was sentenced to life as a pilgrim, but that doesn't bother him at all. He's easygoing and would rather see the world, even if it's filled with dangerous mutants, as opposed to standing around all day protecting some
Yeah.
rich guy.
I love that.
So he's now ready to roll. He has a long spear and two daggers, and not a lot else going on.
Not
Not the
not
smartest
much
guy,
else.
but a real happy disposition.
Yeah.
So that character made, I think, all of 2 minutes to make, and similar to the other grid system games, felt very sort of like, okay, I got this. And I was making a fighter because, as far as I knew, no one else who was going to play was going to be good at fighting.
Yeah.
So that was a very old school, party balance
Old
reason.
school choice.
That's all to say, I'm interested if you're down for this, Chris, if in the future, along with the release of the book, we could do a generator like we did for Stillfleet and we're
Oh yeah.
working on for Blister Critters, where you press a button and you get a random character.
Yeah.
Because I do think that's always fun.
I would love that. And I mean, a lot of the intent with Danse Macabre is to kind of follow some OSR examples where I think I give people the option of either completely randomizing the character or choosing at certain steps. But one thing that's always random is going to be the Maleficia, which I stand by. You have no control over the Maleficia. That's just not in your power to control. But yeah, I mean, it really is, depending on whether you want to choose or just randomize it takes little to no time to create a character, which is something that I really like. It makes session zeros fast. It makes jumping into the game really fast. Like even if players aren't familiar really necessarily with the setting before getting in, you at least do get a good sense of like how your character works at a glance, which is something that I like about the grid system in general. But I think even with a highly randomized character creation, it still works really well.
Yeah, and it's something, we haven't even talked through this much, but something fun to end on, that we can think about is, I know you wanted to do cards with the game, and I really like card-based mechanics. We've been doing a lot of card game design on the side, which is not ever my main thing. I mean, I like narrative games, but I like physically holding cards. And I think it'd be interesting to have some of that, which I do think Mutant Year Zero actually does really well, where you have sort of attributes that are on cards that could be, represented as, a la Blister Critters, like cards in the book drawn in, but you can also then have the physical cards for relatively cheap come with the book, and then you can kind of take them out when you're playing. And that could be, inventory. It could be Maleficia. It could be some other type of thing.
Yeah.
But it just occurs to me that one way to randomize would be to have some of those choices like Maleficia, right? If you had 50 cards or however many it is in the end, and you draw from that deck, that moment will feel, especially if you are able to meet physically with friends, but even over the internet, right? If you have a stack or something, you're like, whoa, what am I going to get? I guess you could cheat, but right, who cares,
Yeah.
right? I mean, assuming
Whatever.
you're doing it right, you just get this random thing. Um, And even with like Spencer Campbell and loot, I was thinking about that as well, of kind of the randomness of what loot you draw from the draw
Yeah.
pile. Maybe there's something with the relics idea and what has quintessence that we were talking about, coming up with sort of fairly long lists, maybe two or three general lists on types of relics, and maybe
Hmm.
those again could be something where physically later, or a simple website again later, there's some sort of button, and you're getting a very random, in a way, plot hook, or kind of the Ark of the Covenant resolution moment where you finally
Yeah.
get the thing, and like you, the GM, actually have no idea. You're just
Yeah.
gonna like hit a button, So, um,
I do really love that idea of like what is the quintessent item, and just yeah, either hitting a button, rolling for it, or just rolling for it physically with dice. I think is really interesting. Which is, yeah, that was something that we had in the kind of original version of the game that is going to be maintained in the new one. We took it out of Prima Mors, but it's something that's going to go back into the full book. Is that the preciousness of quintessent items, instead of it being like everything has quintessence, it's more like items that have a lot of just time spent making them, or artistic value, however we want to phrase that, or frame that. But yeah, just things that took a lot of labor and a lot of energy and love to make are the things that hold a lot of quintessence. So it allows you to,
yeah,
instead of it just being like, well, it's kind of everywhere, anything can have it, it focuses it back down, and it makes it so that you can have interesting mechanics like a deck of cards or a table that you're rolling on to get what the item is. Even if it's just a generic thing, it can still work really nicely.
yeah. I think that idea of basically how Benjamin would have called maybe the aura.
Mm,
And the more aura that an item has, the more that it has this quintessence, this MacGuffin ability to kind of normalize death and dying and birth, in an area, as opposed to the sort of hyper vitalism, the mutation world, the I Am Legend, landscape
yeah.
around you, and sort of creating these bubbles based on intentionality, is a different way. Which I always liked that was one of your pitches for the game. That it's not any one faith; it's just faith in something, which doesn't have to be again religious. Really, it's just sort of intention, right? Human consciousness has had some effect on these items. So I think the idea that you could come up with lists around different religions, and then also just sort of artistic works, and then also sort of humble objects that might have meant something to someone, and you could tell really different stories with those. Again, I think of it in terms of the beginning, sort of the Coen brothers, like couple has a fight, leaves the farmhouse at just outside of the city or whatever, and then we zoom in. The camera's zooming in on one object, and like, what is that object? That the soldiers are going to come try to steal, and she hides, and then later you're sent to get. You actually end up helping them. I just made up the whole plot. Okay, but you could also do it totally at the end, where you go through a bunch of random crawl events, and at the end, you like hit a button, and you're like, I don't like what is
Yeah.
here, and
What is
that
it?
tells us something about the story of the space retroactively, where you're like, oh, weird. Like, it's weird that this trader from so far away died and left this cool item here, or it somehow matches along some dimension of storytelling, that makes sense and sort of gives that gravitas of like, oh, it's really worth it, or we discovered something, right? So I think actually making the game about the objects, which, as you say, it sort of moved away from, and just coming up with a quick start in terms of just mechanically trying to put together the game, and then really from a graphic design, from my perspective, trying to put together a little book that would look nice. We were sort of not as focused on like
Yeah.
the stories in a weird way. It was like, yeah, you're gonna go out and find stuff, cool.
Yeah, you'll find
But I
stuff.
think making that like a through line for the whole book, to me, just selfishly, I love that. I think that's very much the kind of, again, zone fiction that I really dig, and I think it fits the sort of haunted, um, post-civilizational feel, but it can be very specific to the places, the sort of mix of cultures in West Asia, and these specific points that you're interested in, around changes in the composition of big cities in
Hmm.
essentially Eastern Europe and West Asia, in terms of this moment in time when some old orders are beginning to die and new orders are beginning to grow, but it's still very incipient.
Yeah.
So it is interesting in that sense, because again, it's before sort of time periods I've studied in a lot of depth. So it has this sort of it's beyond this horizon of mystery for me as a reader, where I'm like, ooh, what was happening in 1400? I don't freaking know. They didn't really have guns yet.
Yeah.
Um, so it's, once they get the guns.
they had some guns. They had some
Oh yeah,
guns. They
yeah,
were
I
really
guess.
shitty, but they had them.
Right, right.
Yeah, once they get the guns, it all becomes relatable, recognizable, and relatable.
I mean, sadly, in a sad way, but
Yeah,
yes,
it's not wrong.
it's just people shooting
Uh,
each other in the face for the next 300 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We
Um,
didn't even talk about the change in the setting to Constantinople, but maybe we can talk about that on a later. This is a
yeah,
teaser. We're going to talk about why
that's also in
Constantinople.
Prima Mors to some degree. I mean,
It's
Prima
in
Mors
Prima Mors.
is focused on Constantinople, and that became so. There's the short version is initially you wanted to have chapters, and I think you still will have chapters on other places, but it was
Yeah,
sort of more equal. Whereas now the book is saying you're in Constantinople. You can easily set the game elsewhere, but I, the writer, am just going to tell you about one big city. Why? Well, it's very big, it's very
it's
diverse,
huge.
and
Yeah,
it's physically in an interesting location, so it's defensible. You know, it's sort of let's just assume that like as a reader, we're going to walk you through the story from this perspective, but let you know that this is happening worldwide, and we have sort of other ideas, and I think that's a beautiful stretch goal, and I'm very selfishly like I want to write a couple of those
yeah. Well,
from other points of view around the planet.
I want to get people to write them for stretch goals. I think
Yeah,
that'd be super fun.
and we want to find designers who have that background. I mean, I
Yeah,
should say like designers who have some reason to write that history, or
right.
hope maybe cultural relevance or like expert training, and not. I mean, no, obviously it's cool also if you're just like, hey, you watch a lot of anime along some line of inquiry. Um, but yeah, I think it's fun to do Constantinople. I think it means you can focus your research, and I think we can create a kind of look and feel. And you said you'd even met some like you were talking to some Turkish game designers, and just I think there's something interesting with just making a choice and saying, yeah, whatever, this is going to be the kind of backdrop. So it's not that it's not a universalist game. It's just the story is going to be kind of told or framed from a specific perspective to help you get a grapple on sort of address this question that's come up with playtests of how do I be a real person in 1390 as opposed to a fantasy bard in Faerun? And it's like, okay, well, we're going to help you with that. We're going to give you some
Yeah,
very quick, what we call in game design affordances. So things you can use in order to imagine yourself as a peasant in West Asia at the beginning of this apocalypse and at the end of the medieval period, beginning of the gun period. So,
there's the gun
yeah,
period. There's a phrase
yeah.
that you used recently that really stuck with me, and it I think I don't know how to be a real person in 2024, says Vex. That's very good. Neither do I. Neither do I. Um, what was I saying? Oh yeah, there was a phrase that you said recently that has really stuck with me, and I've been thinking about it in terms of the choice of narrowing down from having three kind of big locations in the game just to it being Constantinople, but it's tight scope, high fidelity, I think is what you said, something like that. Where it's just like, yeah, it's a tighter scope for the setting. We're not going to have as many. Originally it was going to be Granada, Avignon, and Constantinople in the main book. Frankly, it was overwhelming to do the research on all those places at once. But it just feels cleaner being able to focus on one area and then giving you kind of like a higher resolution look at this one city instead of spreading it out between three. So I think it helps situate players a lot better than being like, well, I don't know, you kind of pick where you want to be, and like it's a wildly different culture in a wildly different location with a different language, and it's not a one for one kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
That's
I like the idea of focusing.
yeah. And that's from Sarah Shipp, who's writing about board games. So we really like that book, Thematic Integration in Board Game Design, which I think really applies to RPGs. It's also only like 150 pages, and her writing is really, really clean and just mean. It's like, it's just a chainsaw through any level of bullshit book for game designers. So I highly recommend it. So all props to her for that sort of phrasing. But I totally agree for the reason that we were talking about of playtests coming out with the feeling that, well, it's fun and like the mechanics are fun and all that, and I like mutants, but like I don't know how to be a real person.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, let's give you affordances to imagine yourself as a peasant meeple who then gets dressed up as a D&D person and goes out and does stuff in one place, and not worry about teaching you how to do it everywhere on earth all at once, because
Right.
as you said, it's sort of impossible. And I also think it would just dilute, as you're saying, the reader and the player's experience. And I think ideally, like we all kind of know that every GM eventually, hopefully, is gonna, whether it's the first game or the 60th, they're gonna just make up their own setting. They might take this and set it in Spelljammer world. They might set it in modern times. Probably, hopefully, they're going to set it in the same time period, just in different places, and that's really intentional. And I think you should still. I personally think having the couple pages on Avignon and Granada is great, and like the relics can do a lot for that. The relic list, like we were talking about. But I agree that like the framing of where is your character, just say, okay, to start, we're going to suggest, you're in Constantinople. Here's why. And then we're going to kind of consistently give you little bits of not even lore because it's true, right? But
Yeah.
history
Yeah.
to give you those affordances throughout the book. I think that's rad. I think that's a really smart way to kind of close the loop on like, oh yeah, as you said, even like I remember in the early playtest, it's like, oh, I'm going to be this guy who's like a Dutch mercenary who moved to England, and then the
Yeah.
apocalypse breaks out, and then someone else is like, I'm in France, and you're like, okay, I'll see you in 17 weeks
Yeah.
to start the quest. And it just was like, wait, this makes no sense. We need to be in the same
I'll see you in a
location.
month.
Yeah, if I
to,
live.
to wait for
Yeah,
the waters of the English Channel to calm down and
yeah. So, all right, I think we did it. Chris, is there anything else? So this was meant to be, yeah, again, just kind of catching up and setting up that we're going to be doing some AP. So we're scheduling it now. We don't have it scheduled yet, but we'll announce soon, hopefully, some episodes that are kind of focused on and actually going through Danse Macabre. And I think really, for me, also stepping back in terms of Why We Roll, I think it's a great example of using Why We Roll to get at some of those car talk design, thematic
yeah.
integration questions in real time, in the moment with you and me having fun, being silly with our friends, right? And I think we don't have to do that with every game, and it makes sense to do it more with our own games, not only selfishly to market them, but really because like then we're not making fun of someone else's game, right? If you and I have a thought about Danse Macabre, cool, it's your game, right? We don't want to crap on someone else's rainbow. So I think it's a good plan. I don't know if we'll do it for other games. Probably we will, but we're going to start it off with Danse Macabre, and go from there.
Just reading this chat. We had a good chat tonight.
It's a really good chat. Yeah, we got Avi and Vex with some real great heavy hitters in here. Also, yeah. Last thing I'll say then, and just Chris, you should finish it out. Is we're really entering the Patreon, and something we're going to do in addition to patron games, which we're still figuring out exactly how we're trying to scope that. But we always want to run games. We are always running games. We just sort of lost the thread of very clear connection to the Patreon. So we're publishing a lot more. We have a ton queued up. We're going to be running games. And then I think a third thing will be some integration with Why We Roll, which could be as simple as just picking someone at random to shout out or inviting some other sort of more specific feedback or participation. But again, if you're interested, maybe let us know if you have thoughts. Shout outs is a simple one that sounds fun. But yeah, that's something coming down the line that we hope will just, kind of highlight that, like, we want to make this really good, and we really appreciate anyone who can help us just, find the time and energy and mics and pop filters, etc., to do it. So last thought,
Love it.
Chris, take it away.
Patreon.com/Stillfleet is where you can support our games. not to put too fine a point on it, but like we're trying to we're trying to write games and pay rent and all that stuff at the same time. But yeah, we also just appreciate everybody's support no matter what. You could also give us a like and a follow on Why We Roll, or just let this play on YouTube in the background. You don't have to give us money to support us, but we appreciate it no matter what. Otherwise, yeah, keep your eyes peeled for more Danse Macabre stuff coming out. If you are on the Patreon, you're going to see some early releases of some new mechanics and content and art and all that good stuff. I should stop calling it content. I actually really hate that. New mechanics, new art, new writing, new creative prowess that I will be pouring into the world. Not content. It's not just to fill a box. Okay. But yeah, keep your eyes peeled for more Danse Macabre stuff. And then, yeah, like we've been saying all along, we're going to be playtesting. If you want to have an active hand in playtesting, we're going to be doing it live in Brooklyn. We're also going to be doing it on the Stillfleet Discord. So it's for if folks are familiar, I'm running the online campaign as a kind of West Marches light kind of thing. So dropping in and out is completely great, completely fine. If you can't make a week, don't sweat it. I'm not trying to hold anybody ransom. But yeah, it's going to be a bunch of kind of picaresque little adventures. We're going to tie it together. We're going to build out the setting together. It'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, you can check out our Stillfleet Discord, which is discord.com/Stillfleet, if I'm correct.
No, it's a discord.stillfleet.com. So it probably could be both.
Who knows?
It's just not both. Yeah, and Vex, yeah, we'd love to have you. I think that would be, I would, maybe I can speak for both of us and just say, yes, Vex, you're in. Just,
absolutely.
Scheduling.
Just join in. Saturday the something, whatever day it is.
All right. Well, you can, it depends when people listen to this, when they will get that info. We could move this one ahead in the queue. I'm fine with that. It's our prerogative.
Yeah.
That's it. Thanks for listening. Thanks to
everybody.
Vex. Thanks to Avi.
Robin Hood Men in Tights,
Chris.
boys. All right. See you later.
Take care. This is why we roll. Bye-bye.
This is why we roll. Yeah, hey. Thanks for listening to Why We Roll.
Our theme music is by the brilliant Sam Tyndall and Arpline.
If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You can find us on all social media at Stillfleet. You can find out more about Danse Macabre, Stillfleet, and all of our games over at stillfleet.com.
Every hero strikes out on their adventure for a different reason.
To prove myself worthy of my mother's praise.
To write my own story and discover who I really am.
To prove to my family that I am more than they believe me to be.
To revive the god that has chosen me.
But when the fragile balance of the world is in jeopardy, and sinister forces move in the darkness, heroes will be tested, pushed to their limits and beyond. And it will be left to them to determine if they are up to the task. There is a darkness rising. Will they be able to overcome the challenges and meet this evil head-on?
For my god.
For my story.
For my freedom.
For the world.
To restore the balance. Modified Role Season 2, The Chronicles of Erin, a D&D 5e actual play podcast. New season, new characters, new story. Find us on all the usual podcasting apps or at modifiedrole.com.